So modern World of Warcraft has had a massive influx in the amount of earnable transmog or cosmetic items, but with this massive amount of items, some of the most unique or sought after appearances have gone unknown to a lot of players. So in this video, I want to go over 5 of the most unique and sought after weapon appearances that you may not even know exist. And to start off, we're heading over to the Dawn of the Infinite Mega Dungeon from Dragonflight. Now, a small disclaimer, this dungeon is currently not in classic loot mode. So if you're trying to obtain any items from this dungeon, you have to be on a correct class that can use and get that item as a drop and the correct spec. But once this dungeon does get turned into classic loot mode, you'll be able to go on any class or spec and earn all of these transmogs. Now for our first weapon, we have a very paladin-inspired mace called the Infinite Hand, which is a drop from Tyr, the Infinite Keeper. Now this is a two-handed intellect mace, so before this dungeon is turned into classic loot mode, you'll need to have a class and spec that can use this, such as a paladin being in holy loot spec. And you can obtain this weapon in any difficulty available to Dawn of the Infinite, so you can go run this dungeon on heroic mode every day for another chance at this weapon. And this is one of my favorite weapons on this list. It's just this big paladin-inspired two-handed mace that has just a really cool effect and animation, because on the head of the weapon, it's cracked and infused with the energy of the infinite dragonflight, and it also has these really cool reverberations on each side of the weapon. It's just a really unique and cool looking animation. And since this weapon is from the Dragonflight expansion, meaning it's a pretty recent addition, this weapon just also has a very high graphical quality. As you go further and further back into expansions, the graphical quality gets lower and lower, but this is super recent, so it's a very high graphical quality as well. And this is just one of the coolest looking maces in the entirety of the game. Now for this next one, I'm going to cheat a little bit because we have 2 for the price of 1, because one boss in the Dawn of the Infinite dungeon drops 2 very unique weapons. And both of these weapons are dropped from the Time Loss Battlefield boss. And depending on if you're Horde or Alliance, it can be 2 different bosses, being either Anduin Lothar or Grommash Hellscream. But no matter which of the bosses you get in the actual fight, you'll be able to obtain both of these weapons from the whole encounter. And starting off, we have a very sought after weapon that's actually been in the game files long before this dungeon was ever released. And this is the HD remake of Gorehowl, Might of the Warchief. So this is the weapon that Grommash is using in this fight. And we've obviously gotten multiple Gorehowls in the past, whether it be just a normal Gorehowl or whether it be a old god infused Gorehowl. We've had many iterations of this weapon, but this is the HD version. So this is, in my opinion, the best looking version of this, and this is going to be a two-handed strength axe. So you're going to be needing to play a class and a spec that can get this as a drop. And if you're keeping track so far, doing this dungeon as a paladin and just switching your loot spec will allow you to get every weapon that's going to be on this list from this particular dungeon. And with some of the recent and up-and-coming orc-inspired transmog sets, this is the perfect weapon to go along with some of those. Now, likewise, from this same encounter, you can also earn Anduin Lothar's sword, which is Quell Zaram, the High Blade of the Lion. Now, this is a recolor of Quell Dalar, Cunning of the Shadows, which was a weapon obtainable in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion from the Battered Hilt, which has been farmed by people since it was released all those years ago. And while this is just a recolor of a very old sword, this is still a very unique and sought after looking sword. And this is going to be a one-handed strength sword. So again, you're going to need a class in the correct loot spec to get this as a drop. And again, a paladin changing their loot spec can also get this weapon. But since it's from the same boss, you'll need to do multiple runs to try to get both of the weapons from this encounter. But like mentioned previously, you can do this dungeon on heroic difficulty, so you can come back here every single day to get a chance at any of these 3 weapons. So the Dawn of the Infinite Mega Dungeon holding some of the most unique and cool looking weapons we've gotten in quite a while. And our next weapon takes us even further back in WoW's history to the Legion expansion with the Hammer of Vigilance, which is a drop from the Maiden of Vigilance in the Tomb of Sargeras raid. And what makes this weapon and some more of the weapons on this list this really interesting is that the Legion expansion didn't have any actual weapon drops. You had the artifact weapons with all of their unlockable appearances, but that means that none of the bosses or dungeons drop actual weapons, but there are a handful of cosmetic weapon drops you could get from some of the raid bosses, and this is the first one. Now, the Hammer of Vigilance is a really interesting weapon because it's basically the weapon of a Titan construct being partially corrupted by fell energy. And this is a one-handed mace, but because Legion is in legacy loot, you're able to obtain this on any character, but this is a one-handed mace used by a Titan construct, so it's very Titan inspired and built, but then one side of it is corrupted and infused by fell. So it's a really cool and really unique looking weapon, and I'm sure you could make some partial fell, partial Titan inspired transmog sets to go along with this mace. It's also a one-handed mace, so you could dual wield this as well. And while you're able to obtain this on pretty much any class now, this still has a very low drop rate, which is shared across all of these Legion weapons that are actual drops. Now, continuing on with the Legion expansion, we have our last two weapons coming from this same raid, and these are two of the most sought after and unique looking weapons in the entirety of the game's history, and that's also because these are both weapons wielded by the bosses you're killing to obtain them. And first off, we have Taishlarek, which is a two-handed sword obtained from Agramar from Antorus, the Burning Throne. And this is easily one of the most unique swords in the entirety of the game, because halfway up the blade of this weapon, it's completely broken off, and the rest of the blade is made up of fire. And I'm sure you've probably seen some Fury Warrior or Paladin walking around with this weapon transmog before. It's one of the most unique weapons and probably one of the least obtained weapons in the game because this drop rate is incredibly low at around a 0.2%. But because Legion is now in legacy loot mode, you'll be able to go obtain this on pretty much any character and then learn it. It'll be added to your warband, so all of your characters will be able to use it. And while fighting Agramar, you'll be able to get a good look at the sword because he's using a much bigger version of this. And while there are no color variations of this weapon, you'll be able to obtain it on any difficulty of the raid, which includes LFR. So no matter what difficulty you're trying to farm the raid on, you'll have a chance at getting the sword. And for our final weapon, we have one of the coolest looking weapons ever introduced in the game, the Scythe of the Unmaker, which is a two-handed polearm dropped from Argus the Unmaker, who is the final boss of Antorus, the Burning Throne. And on top of this being just one of the coolest weapons in the game, this also has two versions from the same boss. So if you go and defeat Argus on LFR, normal, or heroic difficulty, you have a chance to get the blue version of the scythe, but then you can also go defeat Argus on a mythic difficulty, which will give you a chance at the red version of this scythe. And both of them look incredibly cool. A lot of people like the red one better, but also if you're a Death Knight in the War Within and you're using the Deathbringer hero talent, you're basically using the Scythe of Argus as one of your procs. So you could be using the Scythe of the Unmaker while proccing big swings of basically more Scythes of the Unmaker. And if you really want to flex on people, you can play a Fury Warrior and transmog one of your weapons as a blue scythe and the other one as the red scythe. But that's the whole list of the 5 or more very sought after and potentially hidden weapon appearances in the modern expansions of World of Warcraft. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.